Before you make a college list, there are some very important critical factors that you have to consider, and I want to go over some of those in this video, so stay tuned. The first and most important thing about building a college list is you have to pick a college, obviously, that has your intended major. So whatever major you think you want to go into, you want to make sure that college has that. Now, let me just say something. Just because you think that you want to go into a certain major doesn't necessarily mean that you'll end up majoring in that in college. I mean, it very well may, but it may not be. So you have to keep that in mind. When you say, I want to study engineering in college, and when you actually get there, you might end up studying business. So you want to go to a college. If you're not 100% sure, make sure you choose a school, or when you make your list, you choose schools that have many majors. And so that if you do change majors, then you don't have to transfer schools. You can stay within the same school and major in that other thing that you didn't plan to major in, okay? So the second criteria is cost. And most students assume, and parents assume, that public schools are always cheaper than private schools, but that's not always the case. There are some private schools that have a lot of money to give, and they're willing to give them to well-deserving students and students who have scored very high on standardized test scores and excelled in their schoolwork. A lot of times they'll be given merit scholarships, and these are not things that you have to apply for anything. They just give them to you because they really want you, because they think you deserve it, and they want you to attend their school. So that's one thing. You could also be a very high-performing athlete, for example, or a musician or something, and they really want that type of student, and you fit that, then they may give you scholarships, or they may admit you into that school, even though in some cases your grades and scores are not as high. So there's a lot of factors that come with that, but don't assume that necessarily a private school is more expensive. I would say this, though, generally when it comes to costs, that if you can commute from home and go to a local public university, that's probably going to be, in most cases, the most affordable way to get through college with no student loans, or if very little student loans. So that is generally the case, because commuting from home will reduce your college expenses by sometimes almost a half. So that is, cost-wise, usually the best way to go. The other factor is of course, the standards. What kind of SAT scores, what kind of GPA, and what kind of student are they looking for, and what are their acceptance rates? If a college has a 60 or 70% acceptance rate, they're accepting 60 or 70% of the students who apply. That's, a lot of public schools are like that, and so they accept a lot of students. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you have colleges that only accept 5% or less. Those are very difficult to get into. It doesn't necessarily mean that the college is better, okay, whatever that may mean. It's probably ranked higher, it's more prestigious, but again, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll get a better education there. I always tell people calculus at Harvard is not that different than calculus at your local public university, or maybe even community college. And so, there's not that quality of education difference as much as people think, if at all. So, but you do have to look, of course, at what the average GPA for incoming freshmen and what the average SAT scores and so forth, and see if you sort of fit that. Now, one thing about that, just because you're a little bit lower than average doesn't mean you won't get accepted. Just because you're higher doesn't necessarily mean you will get accepted. It really depends on how many percent of students that they're accepting. So, but that's something to keep in mind. The other factor is location. And this is an important thing. This is really a personal thing. I live here in Maryland State, and a lot of my students, I would say the vast majority of my students, want to go to school on the East Coast. They don't want to be too far from home. I do have the student once in a while who says, I want to go to California or something. But in most cases, they want to stick local. They want to go as south as North Carolina, and they want to go up as far as Boston, Massachusetts, something like that. That's typically the geography that my students are looking at. But location is, of course, something you have to keep in mind. Some people hate the cold, and so they say, I don't want to go up to Massachusetts, and get or upstate New York or something where they have 3 feet of snow. Some people don't want to go to Georgia because it's very humid there. They hate humidity. There's a lot of reasons why people want to or don't want to go to certain schools in certain states. That is, again, completely optional. It is a personal preference, but that's something you want to keep in mind. And so I would encourage you, if you can, to go visit those places. If you're very serious about going to school, I would visit them, the location, to make sure that you just feel that that's a school that you would want to, if accepted, you'd want to attend for 4 years. The other factor is the type of school. Is it a public school? Is it a private school? Is it a liberal arts school or a non-liberal arts school? Now, public schools, private schools, I wouldn't say necessarily that there's a huge difference. There are larger public schools. Public schools are usually larger, but there are smaller public schools, like St. Mary's College in Maryland. That's a public school, but it's way smaller than, let's say, University of Maryland College Park, for example. There are private schools that have a much larger student body than others, and some private schools are very small. So I don't want to generalize public schools are huge and private schools are very small. You have a mix, and there's a spectrum of sizes, student body, class sizes in the different schools. So I would look more at what kind of student-teacher ratio there might be, what kind of courses they have, what kind of majors, what kind of opportunities they might have, and so forth. But I think the bigger difference is liberal arts versus non-liberal arts school. If you apply to a liberal arts school and you attend a liberal arts school, you better like to read and write. You should really love reading and writing, because you'll be reading and writing a lot all 4 years, regardless of what your major is. Okay, that's a big difference between liberal arts school and non-liberal arts school. When you attend a non-liberal arts school, let's say you're a mathematics major, maybe you'll take an English class or two, maybe, but you'll, for the most part, be studying math. Whereas if you study math or major in math in a liberal arts school, you'll be reading about history, and you'll be writing papers all 4 years, not just history, but English and other things. And so that's a big difference, to summarize in a nutshell. So look out for that and make sure that you don't attend a liberal arts school if that's not where you want to go. All right. Lastly, and the most important thing that I could say to you about creating a college list is to make sure you have enough safety schools. This is, I think, the biggest problem. Students and parents do not include enough safety schools, or they think that some schools are safety schools, but they're really not. When I look at that, I'm thinking, that's not really a safety school. When I say safety school, there is zero doubt that you'll get into that school. You will get into that school 100%. That has to be the case. That's what I mean by safety school, okay? Safety schools are different than target schools. And even when students say, oh, this is a target school, a lot of times I don't think they're target schools. Like, I have students who say, I think that Boston University is a target school. I think Case Western is a target school. I think Northwestern is a target school. Even if your GPA and SAT scores are really high, some schools I think are never target schools because they're so popular that I would say they're like 50-50, maybe less than 50. It really depends on what your demographic is and whether you are an underrepresented minority in applying to that school. And I'm not just talking about race here. I'm talking about gender. I'm talking about your background. I'm talking about the income of your parents. I'm talking about whether you're the first person in your family to go to college. I'm talking about whether you're going to be a minority or a majority in the thing that you're intending to study in that school, and so on and so forth. There are many factors. And so I would be really careful with that. And I would put more super safety schools in your list than you might actually intend to do originally. Okay, so make sure you have enough safety schools, real safety schools. And I think that's one of the most important things. So I hope that helps. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.